This is Counsel Gray. I wanted to come on and weigh in on the Karmelo Anthony verdict. You guys, the defense, they got their hind parts handed to them. And I'm going to say, to me, it didn't have to go down that way. And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, or you know what? So I came up with a list of things. I was going to come in here and I was going to talk about why I thought they were going to lose, but literally, and I was going to do that during the jury deliberations, but literally the deliberations happened so fast that I didn't even have time to get my thing up. Like literally before I could hit, record, the jury was back. So I got to be honest. I knew when the jury came back within like 2 or 3 hours that Karmelo Anthony was cooked. But I'm going to be honest, before Karmelo Anthony, before the verdict came back, I knew that Karmelo Anthony was cooked. And I'm going to tell you why. Okay. But out of respect for the craft, I am going to say that this defense team had a really, really tough case. They had a really, really tough jurisdiction. They had a really, really tough jury, right? So out of respect for the craft, this was not easy. But there were so many missed opportunities. And I'm just gonna answer a bunch of questions that I've seen people talking about sort of leading up to it, all of which I think contributed to why Karmelo lost. Okay. So the first one is people were asking, why did the case go so fast after so long, right? After we waited over a year, why did the case come and go so fast, so to speak, right? So first of all, it's not unusual for a murder trial, especially a high profile murder trial, to take a year, 2 years, right? Sometimes we hear of cases taking 3 years before they come to trial. There's a lot that happens. There's investigations. A lot of times there's medical stuff. Sometimes there's school year stuff, right? It would not surprise me to think that this case was timed for the school year to end. There were, 20 kids had to testify in this thing. So that's not uncommon. What I was surprised by was the very abrupt ending. And I'm going to tell you why I think they had that really abrupt ending. Okay. So you guys heard that on the last day of testimony, which people thought that the defense was going to put on, and this was yesterday, right? People thought the defense was going to put on a couple more witnesses. A lot of people were looking for Karmelo to speak. A lot of people were looking for maybe some expert witnesses. And all of a sudden there was just this abrupt stop. And on the last day of trial, which was yesterday, the court broke at 11. They broke for 90 minutes and they were coming back at 12:30. This would be Central Time. And everybody expected that the case was going to pick back up with more witnesses. But people who were there, what they said was that there were about 2 hours of back and forth and a little bit of chaos and these side meetings, and the family was, there was activity with the family, the lawyers, the judge. People were in and out of chambers for about 2 hours after they came back from lunch, when they were expecting the case to pick back up. And then after that chaos, what happened was the state rested and the defense rested. So people were really surprised. Okay, so why does this happen? I can almost guarantee you that one of 3 things was happening. Okay. The defense and the prosecutor, they were in meetings about the witness list. I can almost guarantee you that the defense wanted to call at least 1 or 2 more witnesses, and the prosecutor objected to those witnesses. And the judge agreed with the prosecution, and then the defense had no more witnesses. So that's the first thing, right? That they couldn't agree on the defense's witnesses, and somehow the judge sided with the prosecution. The second thing is, if they did agree on subsequent witnesses, they could not agree on the scope of the testimony. Now, here's the thing. Every side is trying to limit the helpful witnesses of the other side. And if they can't restrict the entire witness, they try to restrict the scope of what that witness can talk about. So even if the judge had allowed the defense's next witness, if the prosecution tried to limit the scope and the judge agreed with them, defense may have felt like it's not worth putting them on. If we can't get them or we can't use them to say what we want to say, then the defense may just be like, we're not even going to put them on. Okay. That's the second one. The third thing that may have been happening, right, especially when you hear from people who were in the courthouse that the mother and father, Karmelo's mother and father, they were kind of moving about, right, during this 2 hours after lunch. It could be that the family and the defense were trying to decide whether Karmelo was in the right mental state to take the witness stand in his own defense. And they may have decided at the last minute that he was not in a good place or would not be helpful to his own defense. And so they did not call him. And at that point, it was over. Okay. So the next thing is that people were talking about was this kid, Eddie Parra. Now, Eddie Parra is the kid who Karmelo now says, right? We did not know this a year ago. We learned this in trial, that Eddie Parra is the kid that Karmelo said that he knew or recognized in the tent, and that's why he went over there. Now, this kid, Eddie Parra, is also a student. And to me, right, and he seems to be some type of Hispanic. To me, and I'll tell you why that's important. I'm not just identifying people's ethnicity, but to me, this kid is in a tough situation. First of all, he's completely uncredible. Completely, to me, uncredible. But obviously, I did not agree with how this how this jury saw everything. But to me, Eddie Parra was completely uncredible. But he's in a tough situation that no kid should ever have to be in. Okay? He is the one who could be viewed as having brought Karmelo to the tent, either affirmatively or passively. He was the draw that brought Karmelo to the team tent where all of this went down. Okay. Now, this kid is still in school with all these other kids, and the ones who have graduated, they're still in the same community, right? So they have tremendous pressure to toe the line, right? They have tremendous pressure to toe the line and to be on code. So this kid, Eddie Parra, he says, trying to diminish two things. By trying to say that he did not really know Karmelo Anthony, he basically tried to, and maybe successfully, accomplish two things. One, he tried to diminish Karmelo's story that he knew somebody there, or that he had a good friend in the tent. But the other thing that this kid, Eddie Parra, was doing, he was trying to signal to his classmates and his community mates that I did not do this. I did not bring this harm into our community, right? And I feel bad for this kid, but because he was in that catch-22, I do not believe a word that he said. And in fact, the defense was able to discredit him by showing that, at the very least, you guys have hung out, these 5 or 6 times for the pictures that they showed. But the other piece about this kid, Eddie Parra, is that I feel like he really, really betrayed Karmelo. Right. And like I said, I get it. He should not have been in that position. He really betrayed Karmelo. I can't see if anybody, hold on. So anyway, and that's the thing about Eddie Parra. To me, completely uncredible. So the next question that a lot of people were talking about before the verdict, right? Why didn't Hunter testify? Why didn't the prosecution call Hunter? A couple things, right? It could be that they didn't want to re-traumatize him, right? His family may have drawn a hard line. You cannot re-traumatize our son. There is a fraction of percent who can say that their twin brothers died of a fatal wound in their arms. He is a member of a very, very small club, which you would think that the prosecutor would have used to develop sympathy with the jury. But the family may have said, no, we're not going to let you re-traumatize our kid. So the other thing, hold on, sorry. The other reason that Hunter may not have testified is because he could not have withstood cross-examination. And the risk of cross-examination is, first of all, getting outfoxed by a seasoned defense attorney. Now, here's the thing. I was going to talk about why Hunter and Karmelo did not testify as one thing, but there are different reasons why they did not testify. So I'm starting here with Hunter. Now, if it is true that Hunter is a big kid, if it's true that he is an angry kid, if he's a bully, and there was a lot of talk about that, right? That Karmelo and Austin were big bullies. They were literally quite big. They were angry kids, right? We know that they have, kind of a tough family upbringing. The prosecution didn't want to risk putting Hunter on the stage. I mean, on the, well, I guess technically on the stage, but on the stand, because he didn't want to risk that Hunter would do something that makes both him and Austin less sympathetic victims, right? And that's a huge risk. The other thing that Hunter could have done if he didn't perform well on the stand is that he could have made Austin and Hunter look like one big threat to Karmelo, right? And the way it is now, the defense tried to paint Austin as this really big guy threatening this little Karmelo. If Hunter had shown any signs of anger or aggression or anything like that, the jury could have conflated Hunter and Austin into one big threat, as opposed to just Austin as the threat. So the prosecution could not risk it. But here's the other thing, okay? The public and the jury already had Austin's version of events, right? The teary-eyed, sympathetic Austin, Hunter, right after the incident happened. We've all seen Hunter's side of the story. The jury has seen Hunter's side of the story, right? You do not get rejected from a jury just because you are aware of a case, right? Because there are some cases where you literally would not be able to find a jury, especially in the jurisdiction where the incident happened, right? So it is very possible that the jury already had Hunter's version of events in their mind from that early TV footage. So in that regard, the work was already done. All that could happen by putting Hunter on the stand would be to make him seem less sympathetic and his brother less sympathetic. The other reason that they might not have called Hunter is because there may be pending litigation against him, or there may be pending litigation. In fact, there is pending litigation from their family against the Anthonys. Both families could have pending litigation against the jurisdiction, against the school district. So nobody wants to risk their money to have this kid on the stand, especially when it didn't seem like a close call. Okay, so why didn't the defense call Karmelo? This is one of the things that everybody is questioning. Why did they not put, hold on. Why did they not put Karmelo on the stand? In a self-defense case, you usually hear from the defender, because self-defense is one of those things that you have to see it from the eyes of the defender, right? There is a reasonableness question, and you have to see it from the eyes of the defender. And no one can put you in the eyes of Karmelo except Karmelo. Had he been successful on the stand, it would have been he would have been a phenomenal witness in his own behalf. Okay. However, and I'll tell you, I'll be honest, I did not think that when the case went back to the jury, I thought there was reasonable doubt. Okay. And I'll tell you why. When you have a bunch of witnesses, and altogether there were, 20 something witnesses, right? When you have a bunch of witnesses and they're all uncredible in various ways, right? Because there was a lot of dispute between them about the details, right? Of what happened, of the facts. How aggressive was the push? Was Karmelo actually surrounded, right? All these, when did the knife come out? Who did the provocation? So what juries will do when they have a lot of witnesses to the same incident that don't agree, jurors will create in their minds, in aggregate, they will aggregate the witnesses and create a range of truth for each of the facts. Okay, so you've got all these witnesses who observe the same thing, and their versions of what happened are different. So what the jury will do is they will aggregate them into one testimony, but for each fact, they will establish a range of truth. And the ends of that range for each fact are the disputed facts between the witnesses. Okay, so you can picture it like a soundboard, right? You know, a soundboard, how you have all those levers that slide up and down for different parts of the volume. That's what they create for the facts when they aggregate all the witnesses into one. That's the range, right? The top says plus 10, the bottom says minus 10. That's a range, and then you fine tune it within the range. The reason I believe that there was reasonable doubt is because there is a combination of those ranges where Karmelo Anthony could have felt that he was fighting for his life. had the defense put Karmelo on the stand, what he would have done if he did not perform well is he would have closed the range of facts. He would have closed the range of truth for each of the facts. And therefore could have, if he did not perform well, eliminated the combination that supported self-defense. If he had done well, he would have closed the range of truth of each fact in a way that aligned with the defendant, with him. Okay, so if there was any reasonable doubt going in, had they called, this may have been their fear. When we do this analysis after the verdict has come out, now we say to ourselves, well, they should have just put him on the stand, because the worst that could have happened would be that he cost himself the case. But that's what happened anyway. So now, in hindsight is 2020. Now it's like, well, we could have let the kid go up there and actually fight for his life, right? But what the defense was probably thinking was that we've got this range, right? They've aggregated all of this testimony into one. We've got this range of truth for each of the critical facts, and there is a combination within those ranges that Karmelo wins this thing. That's probably why they didn't put him on the stand. And I would have said, right, that this just means not putting Karmelo on the stand, right? And the other thing Karmelo could have done on the stand is he could have closed some of the open loops, right? His attorney could have used his testimony to make certain arguments that were not made earlier in the case. But all hope is not lost, or would not have been lost, if defense had, it just meant that they had more work to do in their closing. And it looks like they did not do the work in their closing. So that's why I think Hunter and Karmelo, of course, these are gambles, right? But the risk was that either of them could lose their temper, either of them could negatively impact the jury, and they both must have thought that they had a path to victory without calling their person. Okay, so the other thing is, in the case generally, the main job of both sides, and obviously the prosecution did this better than the defense, right? Because the defense, I mean, their whole thing got shot to who knows where. The main thing that they both have to do is establish on the timeline of events. They have to establish where along that timeline, and this is with any case, any trial, anything. The job of each side is to determine where on that line the problem started. Okay, so there's a timeline from left to right. The start of the timeline is the decision that Karmelo made to go under the tent. The end of the timeline was, when the police came, etc. So in that timeline, right, which we know all occurred within a couple of minutes, both parties are trying to drop a vertical line and say, this is the cutoff point. This is the line of demarcation. This is where the problem happened. Now, this is why people are so, the defense obviously is going to try to move the timeline earlier, right? They're going to say, from the minute Austin approached Karmelo and tried to move him, they're going to say that's where the problem started, and it started with Austin. The prosecution, however, is going to try to move that line of demarcation, right? In this timeline, where did the problem start? They're going to try to move it later in the altercation, and they're going to try to move it to the point where Karmelo said the words that they're saying are words of provocation, right? So in other words, the prosecution is going to try to move the line of demarcation, right? When did this thing go from a normal day to a bad situation? The prosecution is going to try to move it to much closer to when Karmelo pulled out that knife. The defense is going to try to move it much earlier in the exchange. Okay. And one of the reasons that I think that people are split racially on this issue, Black people, you'll hear them saying, well, if Austin had never come up to Karmelo, this wouldn't be a problem. And what that harkens back to is this feeling that a lot of Black people have, that white people believe that they are the ones who get to decide and regulate where Black people can and cannot be, where they get to live, where they get to sit, where they get to get an ice cream cone, where, right? And this is the Karens in the park, right? This is the Karens coming up to a Black family that's having a barbecue and telling them, hey, you're not allowed to have a barbecue here. You got to move. This idea of Black people feel that white people believe that they get to move Black people whenever they want to, right? So they see a problem with the fact that Austin and his brother and their goons, that they even came over to Karmelo and told him to move. On the other hand, white people feel like they don't see any problem with that, right? They don't see the history that taps into, right? This kid did not own the property. He did not have the right to even tell Karmelo to move, let alone try to physically move him. But white people don't understand that is considered a massive offense, a massive threat to the survival, health, existence, and well-being of Black people, right? So they don't see any problem with it. They don't see the line of demarcation, right, where the problem started. They don't see that as happening until Karmelo said what he said, right? Touch me and see what happens. That's where they see the problem starting. So this is why the two sides really can't agree on that. And I'm going to be honest, defense counsel did not do a good enough job of establishing that fact. And they had a rough jury. Okay. So, but this is the main job in any dispute, establishing the line and where did the problem start. And these two, obviously the prosecutor did a better job. Now, the other thing that people are talking about, and I've heard a lot of versions of this, and I, we have to wait and see what the truth is. A lot of people keep saying that this was an all-white jury. I don't believe that was an all-white jury. I think I heard that there were 7 white men. There were 3 Asians and 1 Middle Eastern person, and I don't know who the other ones were, but I did not hear that this was an all-white jury. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes an all-white jury is better than a jury of immigrants, right? And if he had 3 Asians and 1 Middle Eastern, they may be first-generation immigrants, they may not be. Sometimes they can be very, very unpredictable, okay? Especially given everything that's going on right now about Black people, and the Cyrus Carmack Belton kid and Black people boycotting Asian salons and all this kind of stuff. But here's where sometimes the reason I say that sometimes an all-white, especially a large jury, the reason I say sometimes an all-white jury is better is because the chances that you have 12 white jurors who all have the same leanings is slim. It's slim, right? There would be at least one of them who can say, hey, it was not right for him to go up and tell the kid to move or to try to physically move the kid. Immigrants can be really, really difficult, right? They're very unpredictable because you often don't know where they align. You don't know what biases they harbor. Psychologically, we don't understand immigrants as well as we understand white people and Black people. And that's just a fact, right? We don't understand their culture. We don't understand their language. They are a part of the mainstream culture, but we are not a part of their culture. So we don't understand how their minds work as well. Another thing that we have to find out, did they have kids? We don't know. One of the things that had Karmelo testified about is that he could have shown that this kid, Eddie Parra, had broken his heart. And this is something that every parent can relate to, right? Eddie really betrayed Karmelo on the stand for his own survival. I get it, right? Eddie's in a tough spot, but he really did betray Karmelo. So what they could have brought out from Karmelo on the stand is like, wow, I literally just disrupted my entire life because I thought this guy was my friend and I was going up to say, hey, what's up to him? And now I find out on the stand after all these years that he doesn't even think of me the same. And what that would tap into is every single parent knows this feeling of when your kid comes home and says, Mom, nobody likes me. Hey, Mom, the other kids didn't let me play with them, right? If you're a mom and your kid comes home, right, your 8th grader comes home, your 6-year-old, whoever comes home and says, Mom, the other kids don't like me, you want to literally go to the school and hurt somebody. Like, this is how parents react over their kids, right? Had they put Karmelo on the stand and pulled that moment of vulnerability out of him, like, whoa, I thought I had a friend, but I don't have a friend. I think the parents could have related a little bit more to Karmelo. It was again, it was a missed opportunity. The other thing that you have to ask when it comes to the jurors, white people do believe that they have the right and the ability to remove Black people from where they don't want Black people to be. But they don't just do that to Black people. They do it to lots of people. They believe that they are the controllers of property, of, you know, and space and place and time. So with the jurors, the question would be, do they relate more to the mover or to the one who is being unfairly moved? Right? If they relate to the right to tell people to get out of a place, right? If they believe that this kid, Austin, had the right to tell Karmelo to move, like he owned the place, right? Like he was a coach, like he was staff or whatever it was. If they relate to the ability and the right to move others, then they would not see any problem with what Austin did. But if you got a juror who could understand the being on the receiving side of being told that you don't belong here, you need to move, you don't have a right to be here, they might have sympathized with Karmelo. But again, they would have had to bring that out by putting Karmelo on the stand, which they did not do, right? So the jury, I mean, like I said, when I saw that the jury came back in less than like 2 hours, 3 hours, I was like, oh, this kid is cooked. They're not even debating murder and manslaughter, because even that, they often would ask for a further explanation of the charges. Or it would take some time for them to sort of parse out the differences between the two statutes. So when it came back so fast, I knew that this defense had been obliterated back there. The next thing, and I'll just say this quickly, the witnesses, a lot of people were talking about these witnesses and what they said, what they didn't say. I didn't find any of these witnesses credible, in part because it's hard to be credible when something happens extremely fast, and the start of it is what drew your attention to it, right? There's always those first couple minutes or seconds that people didn't see until it got loud enough for them to start paying attention, right? But they had, right, so they had these conflicting accounts of what happened, which is, again, it's reasonable. Also, the defense had to handle those students very gingerly. Even if this defense counsel were a real bulldog in court, you can't be that way with children. And so a lot of things that they maybe wanted to push back on, they couldn't push back on. They couldn't really discredit them. And so that was like the defense having one hand tied behind their back, right? The other thing, like I said, the reason I find them all to be not quite credible is also because they're all still in school together. They're all still in the same community. There was some talk on Law and Crime about whether or not, and also I think Meek at Night talked about it, whether or not there was some influencing of these children by Austin's father. I don't know. I didn't see it. I would like to believe that if a few people in the behind the bar saw it, meaning in the gallery where the spectators were, if they saw it, then I would like to believe also that the jury saw it and that the jury factored it in. I don't know. And the other thing, God forbid the defense had made them cry by being too hard on them, then in that case, it would be game over, right? But like I said, in hindsight, when you come out having lost the case anyway, you say to yourself, well, you know, the guy should have gone for it. He should have just done all the things, and maybe one of those things, the choices that they decided not to make, had they decided, it may have made a difference. Okay. So the other thing, the tent culture, I don't think is a big deal. I don't know if it weighed on them as much. You know, there was conflict between the witnesses about whether it's a part of tent culture for the athletes to be going back and forth from each other's tents. I asked, back when it happened, I asked one of my friends who was a high level college, high school and college track person, and she said that yes, it was not uncommon because these track meets might last literally all day, and your one or two events take literally a couple of minutes. So she said that it absolutely happens. It also, you know, when you get to college, it's your chance to see your friends from high school, et cetera, et cetera. But it also could be socialized behavior. right? It could be state specific or county specific, right? Maybe some states the culture is more, more competitive, more isolated. Other states, whatever. I know that at some track meets there are food trucks. At other track meets there are not food trucks. So that could be state specific. I don't know. The other question that I think ended up not really being a big one is, why was he there? Why did he have the knife? In order for the prosecution, so basically what the prosecution was trying to say with that is that he came there looking for trouble. But they would have had to say that this kid had decided, hey, I've got this knife in my pocket. I'm itching to use it, right? This tiny little knife. They don't get much smaller than 3.5 inches. I've got this tiny little knife. Let me go see if I can cause some trouble and use it. If he wanted to take a knife to cause some trouble, I think he would have gotten a bigger knife. I don't know. I don't know how much weight that had on the jury. To me, it's a little bit irrelevant. What we didn't see in the trial was this idea that he might have been in there stealing something, right? And this was what the Karmelo critics said earlier, like last year when it all came out. They were, people were like, well, what was he doing in there? Trying to steal from people's backpacks? That never even came up in the trial. So yeah, the prosecution had to go into the closing and establish that Karmelo was there with nefarious intent in the first place. He was looking for an opportunity to use that knife. Then he had to establish that these were words of provocation. The defense would have gone into closing trying to establish that he had a reasonable fear. He would have highlighted the witnesses who said that Karmelo was surrounded. He would have highlighted the testimony that said Karmelo was seated while the other guy was standing. He would have tried to establish that there was reasonable fear. It was an uphill battle, but there's so many missed opportunities that I see. So I said I would get back to why the defense ended so abruptly. I think that he probably did want to call other experts, but that somehow the prosecutor got the judge to agree that those witnesses should be excluded. Who might he have called? Could have called a self-defense expert. He could have called a linguistics expert to talk about those words of provocation. I did a whole video before on that about what do these words mean, touch me and see what happens, right? Some people would say that initiated the conflict. Other people, especially in the Black community, know that when that is said, it is always in response to what just happened before it, right? It is always said in response to the perception of where this thing is going. Right? If I perceive that you're about to hit me based on what you just did, and I say, go ahead, hit me if you want to, or hit me and see what happens, that's not an invitation to hit me. It is a reaction to what I think you're about to do because of what you just did, right? They could have had a linguist come up and talk about that. Now, all of these people, the prosecution probably would have had a strong objection to, which may be, like I said, what was happening in those 2 hours. Right? They were literally arguing about which of these witnesses could come. Also, there was the guy, the father, who said that he was in the tent because his daughter was there. This was back a year ago when everything first came out. And he said that Karmelo was jumped. I don't know if that came up, but that witness could have been, without knowing more about his background and things like that, that witness could have been dangerous. It also could have been if the prosecution put on a bunch of kids, and Karmelo's only witness was this older Black guy, it would have been associating Karmelo with older, bigger, right? Whereas the other witnesses for the prosecution, they were these, sweet little school kids. For Karmelo's witness to have been that older Black guy, it would have made Karmelo seem less like a child as well. So they had to balance all of this. So another thing that I want to talk about, right? Because I heard somebody say, well, Karmelo could have just run away. He took off running away afterwards, right? I'm not getting into, the duty to retreat and all this kind of stuff, right? Texas does not have a duty to retreat, but here's why. There's 3 main reasons why some states don't have a duty to retreat and others do, okay? The first reason is that not having a duty to retreat, in theory, could be a deterrent to a criminal, right? If you're a criminal and your whole shtick is that you will just intimidate people to do what you want, if there's no duty to retreat, you have to think, wait a minute, this guy might not actually run off. Let me think twice about starting with him, right? So there is, in theory, there should be the deterrent effect. Now, what we know is that states that do have a castle doctrine and states that don't, right? States that do have a stand your ground and states that don't have a stand your ground, they have no difference in the rate of crime, violent crime, okay? So the second thing is that there's this capitalist concept of the sanctity of property. If you are on my property, and property has been defined by the courts to exist even when you're outside, right? If you're sort of in my arc of safety, right? When I was a kid, we talked about not getting inside of people's arc of safety, right? That's what we learned in school. There is a sanctity to that, an autonomy and an agency that comes from having the right to exclude others from your space, from your property, from your arc of safety, right? So, and that's at the root of capitalism, right? The ability to exclude people from your space, right? So if you believe that I have the right to tell you that you can't be here, you would not then turn around and require me to retreat, okay? And then the last thing is, it's too high of a duty to put on a defender to say that you have to retreat. It puts a high burden on that person, the potential defender, to scan the options, to assess the relative benefit of your options. I could run to the left, I could run to the right, I could run behind me, I could put up my dukes and fight, I could pull out, right? It's too high of a burden to put on the defender to say that they have to scan the room, assess the best, and then act because they're required to retreat. So the last thing is, why does this defense counsel seem so inept? And I'm telling you, I held out because there are some trial attorneys that they do 90% of the work of their case in the closing arguments. Other defense counsel, they'll do the work during their main case, right? It's just a personal style. So I was holding out given how highly regarded this particular attorney is in that community. And of course, now the family obviously is questioning whether or not they hired the right guy, because I also did a video last year about why Karmelo's team kept changing. They thought that they had the best attorney that money could get. And maybe they did. This was not an easy case, but this guy, I mean, I'm telling you, I could have had that jury back there for 2 days. If I had this case, I would have had that at least 2 days, even if they still came out with murder. It would not have been hey, anybody think this kid is innocent? Nope. Okay, judge, we're done, right? It would not have been that. But I don't know. I can't speak to this lawyer. I don't know if he wasn't prepared. I don't know if he was too soft. I don't know if he got outfoxed by the prosecutor. I don't know, right? You have to remember that the prosecutor's office has tremendous resources, and they have lots of junior attorneys to help with this thing. The defense counsel has themselves or a small team. I don't know. I thought that he would pull it off in the closing. The other thing is possible, there were so many areas where maybe he was leaving room for appeal, right? The thing about saying to that witness, oh, we've never met each other, right? Everybody was like, how could you not have met one of your witnesses to prepare your witness? He could have been leaving room for appeal. I don't know. So I don't know. When you put all this stuff together, Karmelo Anthony was toast. I knew it the minute the jury came back. I didn't even have time to get out my concerns about the case before the jury was back. So you tell me. I don't know. I mean, they literally got obliterated. I mean, it's almost a humiliation for your jury to come back in 2 hours. Are you kidding? So anyway, that's all I got. I don't know how to tell. Oh yeah, thank you. The fact that there were no black jurors. And again, I don't know the racial makeup of the jury. But that could easily come back on appeal. I'm just looking at your comments to see if there's, Tanya T said this should be overturned due to all the corruption. Yeah, there were rumors that Austin and Hunter's father knew the judge and that they had interacted in different places. Yeah, someone said it looks to me like Eddie lined him up. I think Eddie did him wrong. There's no question about that. Oh, thank you, Alice. Alice said, goodness, I've been waiting on you specifically to give your commentary. I appreciate that. And you know what? I actually have a number of things that I want to touch on in the next week. But you guys, I literally am in court this week. I literally am in court tomorrow. I was, I thought I had a couple more days. That's what I'll say, right? What's today? Tuesday? I thought they would be back there at least a couple days. I could jump in on this. I actually am in court tomorrow, and court this whole week. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the kind words. Actually, I'll be honest with you. That's why I came back, because a couple of people commented. They were like, "Where are you?" Somebody was like, "Where are you? The trial is happening now." And I literally thought I had more time. So I appreciate that. Emblem 2425 said, "I'm sure the jury wanted to and expected to hear from Karmelo." Absolutely. Everybody did. And again, like I said, out of respect for the craft and out of respect for the task that this guy, that this attorney was up against, right? I get it. And now, in hindsight, you're like, well, I should have done it. I should have just tried, right? Nothing worse could have happened by putting Karmelo on the stand. Or Karmelo might have gotten up there and really got people to see things from his own perspective. Now, I'm going to say this, okay? And I said this a year ago when the whole thing first came out. Karmelo and Austin and Hunter and whoever the other kids were that were there, they're really a bunch of dummies, right? A bunch of young kids who were put in a very adult situation with the brains of children, right? We know, especially the male brain is not fully developed until the age of 30. So it's a tough situation, right? And, I don't know, but I think that it's, what's that saying when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, what happens? I mean, this was rough. Eddie is a maggot. I don't want any excuses for him. It doesn't matter how much people don't like someone. You have the onus is on you to tell the truth. Eddie did him wrong. Eddie really did him wrong. Eddie's in a rough spot though. Because this is, even in Texas, which has a large Hispanic population, this is a predominantly white jurisdiction. Eddie is already an outsider, and to be the outsider that brought in the other outsider that, shanked somebody. He's in a rough spot. I'm not making excuses, but yeah, why wasn't Hunter called? Yeah, so I don't know if you were here when I talked about Hunter. Hunter was risky, right? The risk that they ran if they put Hunter on the stand would have been that Hunter made himself and his brother seem like less sympathetic victims, but he also could, right? Since everybody acknowledges that and he even admitted that the two of them went up to Karmelo together, putting him on the stand and he come across as angry or large or aggressive on the stand could lead the jury to believe that in fact Austin and Hunter together were one big threat. And that's what I said. I did a whole video about how the two of them together approaching Karmelo is not double the size of the threat. It is exponentially the size of the threat, right? If they're both the size, someone said that they're linebackers. I don't know football that well, but I'm assuming that means that they're big. Karmelo was small. One of them alone could be a threat. But when you put the two of them together, it's not double, it's exponential, right? So that was the risk, right? If Hunter got up and he was angry or whatever, it could have really backfired. So that's why Hunter wasn't called. But the other thing is, and this is because the family was so quick to get their story out into the media in a way that Karmelo never got his story out into the media, right? Because the Metcalf family got their story out there so early, the whole society and those jurors, they already had Hunter's view. It was almost like by not disturbing that testimony from a year ago that he made to the media, they didn't even have to call him. All he could do would be to blow it for himself. So yeah, those are the reasons that I was going to make a video. I don't know if you guys were here when I first started, but I was saying that I was going to make a video during deliberations talking about my concerns and what I thought the jury was talking about in the back. Literally before I could even hit record, the verdict was back. And I knew right then, I was like, oh no, this kid, Karmelo Anthony, he's going home for a long, long time. Unfortunately, I think a different attorney could have done a better job here. I don't know. So the case is not over. This is just the trial portion. There's going to be appeals, could be potentially years of appeals. We also have the defense gets to decide who they want to sentence them. He's between a rock and a hard place, because if it's true that the judge was not quite friendly and was more friendly with the Metcalf side, you don't want him sentencing you. And then this jury, you also don't want them sentencing you because they decided that you were guilty of the highest charge in the. I'm telling you, I can't think of a shorter time that a jury has come back. And I'm thinking of a lot of cases that I've seen. I mean, even I've seen cases where there were confessions and self-defense was not in the thing. There were confessions and the jury took longer than this. So I don't know, guys. That's all I have. Thank you for jumping on live. I do have some other stuff coming up this week. I may get an extension. I'm waiting right now to find out if I have an extension on my court for tomorrow. If not, I will see you guys maybe tomorrow night or the day after. I appreciate those of you that have been around. If you are interested in seeing where I go with this, hit like, comment, subscribe, whatever the things are, share, and let's stay in the conversation. All right. Thanks, guys.